Hi, women of welcome. This is the part in the live video where I'm like, am I doing this correctly? Is everything working? And I know that there will be people who join us along the way for this conversation. But there is some fun. Hey, I see a few people joining now. I have my son in the same room, so we'll see how this goes. Shout out to everybody working with virtual schooling kids in the background. Am I right? There's some interesting conversations that I'm excited to have with this community, because I know we have seen over and over again in this community that there is a deep compassion and care for people who are kind of stuck in our immigration system or don't necessarily have a clear pathway towards, the safety and security that they're seeking. But we also know that there is concerns and questions in this group about border security, about amnesty, and actually that's what we want to talk about in this video today. And when I say we, I mean me and Bree, but she's not here. I didn't want to make that confusing, but we actually put up a question box a week or so ago and heard some of the questions from the community. And one that I didn't have a chance to address that day was around this question of amnesty. And I think the question just simply said, is that a, yes or no, or good idea or not, kind of dichotomy around that, which I think is a question that a lot of us have. It's a word that we hear thrown around, and we don't maybe exactly know what it means or what it means for all of the different stakeholders in this conversation. And so, to get kind of, super nerdy with like definitions, essentially amnesty in its purest form is sort of this forgiveness of what has happened and allowing people to adjust their status without any, consequence or whatnot. Sort of the opposite extreme of that is this idea of mass deportation, which is that there's no way to fix what's happened except for people to be removed from the country. I think both of those present their own unique challenges, and part of what we wanted to talk to this community about is this idea that it doesn't have to be these extreme responses, or the other response, which is to do nothing and leave things in the status quo of kind of how they've been now. And so our friends at the Evangelical Immigration Table have been working among evangelical communities to talk about what they refer to as restoration-based immigration reform. And so, I think that's a little bit of a mouthful, but there's some really important pieces to what they are introducing to different congressional leaders with the hopes that this could be put forward as sort of this third way. We talk a lot about that in this community, this both and, that it doesn't have to be, open borders or intense border security, that we can have both. We can be a safe community and a welcoming community as a country. We talk about there are ways for people to address the laws that have been violated while also providing a pathway where people can move forward in earning permanent legal residence and eventually citizenship potentially. I will say, when I first started thinking or hearing about immigration, the biggest question I had was simply, why don't people just make it right? Why don't you just make it right? And, I say that with a laugh because I didn't know what I didn't know. So in the way I perceived this issue was that if someone was choosing not to make it right, that's because they had something to hide, or they had some reason why they didn't want to be right with the law. What I've learned since is simply that for many, many, many people in our country, there is no opportunity to make it right. And so this idea of restoration-based immigration reform is actually creating that pathway where people could have the opportunity to make it right. And it includes a fine, which our partners at World Relief, who are supporting this idea as well, will talk about that they believe a fine is an appropriate acknowledgement of the laws that have been violated, while also then allowing that to be restitution for the laws that were violated. And entering the country unlawfully is a misdemeanor, and so this would recognize that law has been violated, while also providing this opportunity through background checks and through different processes that they would have in place for this to be an opportunity for families to stay together while also acknowledging what they've been through. And so, I think you're going to see more from us on this coming down the pike, particularly next week. There'll be an opportunity for you to sign on to a letter so that you can let your representatives in your area know that this is something important to you. But I think it's really important for us to understand and make that distinction between there are people living in the United States that are undocumented. And so when we think about how do we move forward, are our only options amnesty, which doesn't feel like it's a completely inappropriate response, or mass deportation, which also has its own concerns and issues behind what would happen in that situation? Is there this third way where we can think about how do we offer people the opportunity to make restitution for the laws that have been violated, but also have a pathway towards adjusting that status and being able to look at a different type of future? The language from the Evangelical Immigration Table also talks a lot about prioritizing dreamers, or those who have had legal status under DACA for the last few years, as well as those who've had TPS, which is temporary protective status. Again, these temporary protective status there have people who have been living legally in the United States for over 20 years under this status. And, our friend Matt Sorens from World Relief said this in a video we did a few weeks ago we can debate if a temporary status should have been renewed to that extent that someone's been here 20 years under a temporary status. But the reality is that is where many, many families are. And so how do we now, in that situation, offer a way for them to make that permanent? Because they have done everything right. They have followed all of their laws, all of the laws that they've needed to for these provisions that they've had. And so how do we offer a pathway for them to become legal permanent residents and eventually citizens? And so I hope if you have any questions about this, you will feel free to ask. We are still learning as we read through the different things that are being proposed. We know that the current administration is interested and open to some type of immigration reform. And so it's exciting to see these groups of evangelicals gathering around an idea and saying this is something that could potentially be a huge blessing to so many families. It could garner bipartisan support. And it's something that, addresses a lot of the concerns that many of us have about kind of holding that tension between being welcoming and being safe, holding the tension between justice and compassion, and finding all of those ways that we can, in good conscience with our faith and our values, also be able to support something that could make a really big difference for families. And so, again, you'll see more of that, but I wanted to touch on this vocabulary around amnesty and mass deportation and this idea of a third way. And so one of the things I love most about the Women of Welcome community is how much this community is open and brave about holding that tension and that third space. And I know it is not easy. We have, whether it's people in our lives or media headlines or all these different kind of competing voices that are saying it has to be either or, it has to be these extreme responses. Those are the only answers that line up with our values. But I think this community has been such a gift to me, and I think it's been such an encouragement to see women saying, I think there can be some tension here. I can hold that tension. I'm brave enough to hold that tension and to say, let's find this middle path, this third way that where we can be both compassionate and also uphold the rule of law. All of those things are important. And so I hope this helps as we think about where do we go from here. And again, if you have questions, just ask, and we'll keep talking about it, and you'll hear more from us next week. So, all right, have a great day. Maybe I'll exit this.